He wiped the grease off his hands as security dragged him out. The same hands that had once built the fastest race cars this company had ever owned. The CEO didn't even look at him twice. But what no one knew, what no one realized, was that the man they had just fired was the reason their entire racing empire even existed. Stay with me, because this story will change how you see success, respect, and second chances. And if stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Kind Soul Stories. You won't want to miss what happens next. Daniel. Carter always arrived before the world woke up. The garage was still, wrapped in silence, as he pushed open the heavy metal door and stepped inside. With his usual quiet determination, the faint smell of oil and metal greeted him like an old friend. Without wasting a moment, he slipped on his gloves and began inspecting the cars lined up under dim lights. To others, these machines were just projects, deadlines or paychecks, but to Daniel, they were alive. He listened to every vibration, every subtle shift in sound, as if the engines were speaking directly to him. His movements were precise, almost instinctive, shaped by years of experience no one there truly understood. Despite his skill, Daniel kept his head down, avoiding attention. The younger engineers often whispered about him, calling him old school, or joking about how he ignored technical manuals. They couldn't see what he carried inside, knowledge earned not from books, but from countless sleepless nights and sacrifices. For Daniel, life wasn't about proving himself anymore. It was about surviving, about providing for his daughter Mia, who was the only light in his otherwise quiet world. That morning, however, something felt different. There was tension in the air, a sense of urgency that spread across the garage as employees rushed in earlier than usual. A new prototype had failed during testing, and panic was setting in. This wasn't just any car. It was the company's future, the centerpiece of an upcoming high-stakes race. Engineers gathered around it, running tests, arguing, blaming one another as the engine refused to cooperate. Daniel watched from a distance, wiping his hands on a cloth, his sharp eyes noticing details others overlooked. He hesitated for a moment, knowing how this usually went, but then stepped forward anyway. "It's not what you think," he said calmly, his voice cutting through the noise. The room fell quiet, surprised that he had spoken at all. "The fuel system is fighting itself. You're forcing pressure where balance is needed." Some scoffed, others rolled their eyes, but desperation gave him a chance. Daniel moved closer, adjusting components with steady hands, his focus unshaken by the doubtful stares around him. Seconds passed, then a minute, and suddenly the engine roared back to life, smoother than before. For a brief moment, silence filled the room, followed by stunned expressions, but instead of recognition, something unexpected was coming, something that would change everything. That evening, the weight of the day followed Daniel home like a shadow he couldn't shake. The small house felt quieter than usual, though Mia's soft humming from the corner tried to fill the silence. She sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring carefully, while Daniel stood by the sink, staring blankly at nothing, his hands still faintly stained with grease. When he finally joined her at the table, he forced a gentle smile, the kind only a parent can manage, even when everything feels uncertain. Mia looked up at him, with innocent eyes that seemed to understand more than they should. "You're home early, Dad," she said quietly. Daniel nodded, exhaling slowly as he sat down across from her. "Yeah, just one of those days." There was a pause, the kind that carries unspoken truths. "Did something go wrong?" she asked, her voice soft but direct. Daniel hesitated, then reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I lost my job today," he admitted calmly, though the words carried a deeper weight inside him. Mia frowned, clearly confused. "But you fix everything better than anyone," she said, her belief in him unshaken. Daniel chuckled faintly, but his eyes told a different story. "Sometimes people don't always see that," he replied. As Mia returned to her coloring, Daniel leaned back in his chair, memories slowly rising to the surface, memories he had buried for years. There was a time when his name meant something, when people didn't look past him but sought him out. He remembered long nights in massive workshops, sketching designs, testing ideas, pushing limits no one else dared to challenge. He had built engines that didn't just run, they dominated. Back then, the company he had just been fired from was nothing more than a dream, and he had been the one who gave it life. Every bolt, every curve, every system carried a piece of him. But success had changed the world around him. New faces, new power, and suddenly his role faded into the background. Then life struck harder when Mia's mother passed away, and everything else lost its meaning. He chose to walk away, not because he couldn't fight, but because he had something more important to protect. Returning years later, as just a mechanic, had been his way of staying close to what he loved without stepping back into the chaos he had left behind. But now, sitting in that small house with uncertainty ahead, Daniel realized something had shifted. Not just his job, but the quiet life he had carefully built. Back at the company, the atmosphere had turned from urgency to quiet panic. The kind that creeps in when confidence begins to collapse. The once busy garage now echoed with frustration as engineers circled the prototype again and again, running the same diagnostics, repeating the same failed attempts. Nothing worked. The engine that Daniel had briefly brought back to life had completely shut down, worse than before, as if rejecting every forced solution. CEO Richard Hale stood on the upper platform, watching everything with growing impatience. His jaw clenched as investors flooded his phone with demands and threats. "Fix it!" he snapped, though his voice carried more pressure than authority now. Hours turned into sleepless nights, and still no progress was made. It was during one of those long nights that a senior engineer, exhausted and desperate, decided to dig into the company's early records, searching for anything that might explain the foundation of the design they were now failing to understand. What he uncovered stopped him cold. Old blueprints, detailed, precise, far beyond anything the current team had created, filled the screen. At the bottom of each design was a name written with quiet confidence: Daniel Carter. Confusion turned into disbelief as he pulled more files, internal documents, early patents, design notes, all pointing to the same person. The man they had ignored, the mechanic they had dismissed, was not just part of the company's past. He was the reason it existed at all. With shaking hands, the engineer rushed to Richard Hale's office and presented the findings. At first, Richard refused to believe it, brushing it off as a misunderstanding. But as the evidence stacked higher, his certainty began to crack. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar pressing down on him, regret mixed with realization. Meanwhile, miles away, Daniel sat quietly at home, cross-legged on the floor beside Mia, carefully repairing her small toy car. The tiny screws and plastic parts didn't demand recognition or status. They simply responded to care and understanding. Mia watched him closely, her curiosity gentle but persistent. "Dad, why don't you build big cars anymore?" she asked. Daniel paused, his hands still for a moment as he considered her question. "Because sometimes," he said slowly, "the world forgets who built things once they start running." There was no bitterness in his voice, only truth. But that truth was about to catch up with him. As the night deepened, a sleek black car pulled up outside his house, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Inside sat Richard Hale, staring at the small home in front of him, knowing that everything he thought he understood was about to change. The next morning carried a different kind of silence as Daniel stepped back into the garage. But this time it wasn't the silence of being unnoticed. It was the silence of respect. Conversation stopped as he walked in. Eyes followed him, not with doubt, but with quiet curiosity. Even the air felt heavier, as if everyone understood they were standing in the presence of something they had overlooked for far too long. Daniel didn't acknowledge the attention. He simply moved toward the prototype, his focus returning to what mattered most, running his hand gently across the engine. He closed his eyes for a brief second, listening, not just to the machine, but to what it was trying to become. The engineers gathered around him, no longer leading but learning. "You've been trying to force perfection," Daniel said calmly, his voice steady but firm. "But this system isn't built for control, it's built for balance." His words weren't just instructions, They were lessons shaped by years of experience no manual could ever teach. Step by step, he guided them, not rushing, not cutting corners, but rebuilding the heart of the machine with precision and purpose. Hours blended into a long stretch of effort, tension slowly giving way to hope as the engine began to respond differently, stronger, smoother, alive. For the first time in days, the team felt it. They were close. When the final adjustment was made, Daniel stepped back slightly, nodding once. "Now try it," he said. The engine roared to life, not with struggle, but with power that filled the entire garage. A stunned silence followed. Then a wave of relief and disbelief spread across the room. But Daniel didn't celebrate. His eyes were calm, as if he had simply finished a conversation that had been waiting to happen. Days later, the race arrived, and the world watched as the car tore across the track, outperforming every competitor with ease. Each turn and acceleration a reflection of Daniel's unseen mastery. The crowd erupted, the company's name echoing louder than ever. But behind the scenes, something deeper had shifted. Richard Hale stood beside Daniel, no longer towering with authority, but grounded by humility. "I built an empire and forgot the man who gave it its foundation," he admitted quietly. Daniel looked out at the track, where Mia stood smiling proudly, her eyes shining with belief. "It's not about being remembered," Daniel replied softly. "It's about knowing what you gave was real." In that moment, he wasn't just a mechanic, or even a creator. He was a father, a teacher, and a man who had finally been seen without needing to demand it. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that true greatness often hides in silence, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Kind Soul Stories, because the next story might inspire you even more.